Now, storytelling has been the theme of the morning, and our next panel is going to discuss how to tell America's climate change story. And for that, I am honored to introduce our next duo of powerhouse speakers. We have Katharine Hayhoe, who is Nature Conservancy's chief scientist, and she is making sure that communities that don't often get included in the climate change conversation have a voice, and that is key to changing the narrative. She is going to be joined by the one and only 13-time Emmy Award-winning journalist who I worked at with NBC News and who helped me cover storms and hurricanes. When there was little sleep and little food, always did it with a huge smile, Mr. Al Roker. Thank you so much. Hi, Katharine.
Thank you. Oh, and that was really underwhelming, so we really appreciate that. That really, oh, it's building.
It is.
It's building.
Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you for being here. And Katharine, yeah, I've been a huge fan of yours, and I just admire so much what you do and the message you've been putting out. And you were an author of, you were one of the authors on the 5th National Climate Assessment, talking about current climate. And what I found fascinating is that literally no part of the country in this report is going to be untouched by climate change. And mitigation and resilience projects have to be instituted. What was it, last year, $28 billion disasters. Last 5 years, each year it's a new record. Talk about this report's findings and why it is so urgent right now. The report brings out the urgency and what we need to be doing now.
Yes. Well, speaking of urgency, if I could just alter what you said slightly. You said every aspect of the country, every part of the country will be affected. I would say is being affected. And what you do so powerfully is you bring that into people's homes on a daily basis, making it part of their lives. So we know, I've authored the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th National Climate Assessment under the Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations. And each time we are bringing out more and more information about how climate change is here, not just over there, and it's now, not just in the future. But what we're seeing now is that our adaptation and resilience efforts are much larger than they were. I remember in the 2nd and 3rd National Climate Assessment, we were beating the bushes across the country to try to find 2 examples to put in a box of adaptation and resilience. Mm-hmm. And now there's an entire figure showing that in every state around the country there are multiple adaptation and resilience initiatives, but we also know it's not enough because the changes we're seeing happening are happening faster than humans have ever experienced. We've never seen changes this fast, and our entire society is just not built to change that quickly.
Talk about, when you say adaptive resilience, what do you mean?
I mean preparing. And the analogy I use, I always think in images, is we've been living for hundreds and thousands of years as a society as if we're driving down the road into the future, looking in the rearview mirror. All of our planning, our building codes, where and how we grow our food, how we allocate our water, it's all built on the way things were in the past. And if the road is straight, I live in Texas where there's a lot of very straight roads. So if the road is straight, you can drive down the road looking in the rearview mirror. You just, as long as there's not a wild boar on the road, which does happen in Texas.
Yikes.
Yes. But today, we're on a curve larger than any we've ever negotiated in the history of human civilization, and so we have to look ahead, and that's what adaptation and resilience is. It's looking at what the conditions will be like for my home, for this road that we're building, for the crops that we're growing, for the water we're allocating, not just today, but in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, will my home be safe? Will the road be usable? Will there be enough food? Will there be enough water? And in some cases, the answer is, if we continue on our current pathway, no.
Yeah, and in some cases, it's already happening.
Yes.
In a lot of places. Climate change is referred to as a threat multiplier. We've got these extreme weather events happening more and more recently. The effects of climate change, while people may question climate change, which I don't understand how they do that, but they need to realize that everything that's happening now is being made worse by climate change.
That's a great way to put it. I love that idea of a threat multiplier because so often people think, well, okay, you scientists, you broadcast meteorologists, you environmentalists, you care about climate change, but I'm not any of those, so why should I care? But the reality is if our kid plays outdoor sports, or we have, a young toddler who wants to play outside in the summer and it's going to be too hot for them to do that, or our insurance rates just doubled in a single year, which happened to many people right here where we are today in Florida. We realize that this is already affecting their lives. If they can get it, exactly. So we have to show people that what they already care about, the places, the people, the things they already care about, whoever they are already being affected. And that to care about climate change, you have to only be one thing, and that one thing is not Al Roker, and it's not a climate scientist, although Al Roker and climate scientists obviously care very much. But it's just a human living on planet Earth.
Yep.
And if we can make that connection, that's how we help people see that they're the perfect person to help catalyze solutions wherever they are too.
And when you talk about problems in certainly communities of color are vastly more affected by climate change. The folks that can least afford it are the ones that are more greatly affected by it.
Yes, climate change affects us all, but it doesn't affect us all equally. And for me, that's very personal for me because that's why I became a climate scientist, when I realized how profoundly unfair it was that the people who had done the least to contribute to the problem in the first place were the ones bearing the brunt of the impacts. Now, back about 30 years ago, the biggest socioeconomic inequalities we had in the world were between countries, richer versus poorer countries. 2/3 of our socioeconomic inequality was between country. Today, 2/3 of our socioeconomic inequality is within country. So that means within our own cities. Let me just give you a couple of tangible examples. Take any large city in the US. The lower income neighborhoods during a heat wave could be anywhere from 7 up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit hotter during the same heat wave than wealthier neighborhoods. Because they're covered in concrete, they have no green space. Why not? Decades of racist redlining practices. No available mortgages. This is the only cheap place to live. And those places also are much more prone to flooding often, because it's cheaper to buy a place that is more likely to flood. Much worse air pollution because they never had the political or socioeconomic clout to stop a freeway from going right through the neighborhood.
Or factories being built next to them.
Or a waste dump right there. So then along comes climate change. Those areas are hotter, they're more prone to flooding, they're more polluted, and of course fossil fuel emissions produce so much particulate pollution that's responsible for millions of deaths every year. So climate change is not fair. And that's why when we look to solutions, we need to look to solutions that address health, equity, families, air quality, nature, and climate change too.
If you take care of one, you'll take care of the others.
Yes.
One of the things I was fascinated when I first found out about you is that you're a Christian, and you wear that proudly, but you said you were a little hesitant to come out as a climate scientist, as a Christian. And yet you say, if you really are, or a believer, and if you're a faithful person, that climate change or protecting the climate is something that if you read the Bible, you probably should be part of.
Yes. I'm convinced that if you take the Bible seriously, and a lot of people claim they do, that you would be at the front of the line demanding climate action. Because at the very beginning of the Bible in Genesis, it says God gave humans responsibility over every living thing on this earth. And it makes it clear it's not living things in terms of non-human. That includes us, our sisters and brothers too. And then at the very end of the Bible, there's this verse that hardly anybody reads. It says, God will destroy those who destroy the earth. Yeah, it's in the book of Revelation. But for me personally, what's through the rest of it, what's bookended by those two statements, is continued emphasis on how the most seemingly insignificant aspects of nature matter, and how we are all as humans, regardless of our faith or lack thereof, we're all called to love each other and care for each other. And in my opinion, what is climate change other than a failure to love?
And when you put it like that, it becomes even more imperative. Talk to me about, your perception, at least anecdotally, you know, polling says climate change is lower on the food chain as far as people's concerns. But I find that when you actually talk to people, that they're really concerned about this. You know, that politicians don't tend to value it as much as the average person actually does, I think.
Yes, in fact, studies have shown, you know, there's many good efforts to capture public opinion, and the Yale Program on Climate Communication is one of those. And they study public opinion by county, by census tract, by congressional district, and they've shown that elected representatives consistently underestimate their own constituents' level of concern. Why do they? Well, this is really important. It's because on climate change, we self-silence.
What do you mean?
We don't talk about it. 2/3 of people in the US are worried about climate change. 1/3 of us hear somebody else even talk about it once in a blue moon. 2/3 worried, and then once in a blue moon, 1/3 of those people might hear a conversation. That's a huge gap, and it is a much bigger gap between the people who say that climate is or isn't changing, or isn't due to human activities. So you've got this giant group of worried people who aren't talking about it, so why would anybody know that you care if you never talk about it?
Wow. So
mind-blowing?
So that's why we're doing something like this, to get it into that conversation. You know, we've at Today Climate have found that this is so important, but not just talking about the problem, but the solutions, solution-based. You know, we've done some stories about aquaculture, wineries and coffee, sustainability, because people love their coffee and they love their wine. You know, so we went to Puerto Rico to look at how they're trying to bring solar energy to the masses there. How do you find, as a scientist, what are the more successful ways of pushing out solution-based conversations?
Well, first of all, I think they're essential. And I mean, weren't you curious when you heard Al talk about that? Didn't you want to know more? I mean, you know, when someone says wine, what do they do with that? I want to know. So you're making people curious, but you're also giving them hope. So often, so much of the climate conversation discussion happens up here. Facts, data, ocean currents, ice sheets. We have to make the connection from up here to down here. Why does it matter to me here and now, my community, my family, the things I care about? But then there's one more important connection we have to make, and that's from our heart to our hands. What do solutions look like? How can I make a difference? Because I mentioned earlier, 2/3 are worried, 1/3 talk about it once in a while, 8% are activated. 8%.
Wow.
I mean, the gap between the people who are already worried and the people who are activated, that's the gap we need to bridge.
Yeah.
And the number one way to bridge that gap is not by telling them more about how horrible it will be if the ocean current shut down, and it will be terrible, but there's enough bad news already out there. It's telling them what they can do about it. And the number one way to build efficacy, which is a sense of if I do something, will it make a difference? It turns out the number one way to build that is to tell people what's already being done. And show them how normal, ordinary people, not presidents or CEOs or Mr. Beast, but just you, wherever you are, people like you are making a difference, and that means you can too.
I mean, for some of us, we're already baked in, and a lot of people, but as far as young people are concerned, is that, in a sense, the future for affecting those solutions with climate?
Young people have such tremendous energy, and they don't say, like so many of us do, oh, well, that's been tried before, it didn't work, why bother, it's too hard. There's no such thing as too hard when you're young, and we need that energy. But we can't wait for them to fix it for us.
Right.
In fact, a global study that John Marshall at Potential Energy did, and John will be speaking at the end of the plenary this evening, a global study that he did around the world showed that most people are obviously worried about climate change, number one, but their motivation, their number one motivation for caring and acting is love. And it's often love for their children, the children in their life, the next generation. They're fighting for what is closest to their heart. So it isn't just a case of saying, let the young people lead us, as many of them are, rightly so, but it's also, we're doing it for the people we love.
Right. It's a great circle.
Yes.
In closing, how hopeful are you that we're going to be able to wrestle this thing and affect real change?
That's a great question. My answer depends on the day, obviously.
Honest, very honest.
As a climate scientist, you cannot be perennially hopeful because there are days when you just look at the information and the data and you look at how long we've known about it and you just feel like, my gosh, we knew about this before I was born. Why have we not done something about this? But what I do is I practice hope. I don't see hope as a feeling that just comes to you if you sort of sit there. If you go out and you hunt it down, and you look for it, and you find it, and you bring it back, and you share it with people around you, that to me is active, rational hope. And so I practice hope in a very disciplined way.
How?
I go out and I look for positive stories. And this is an example of, we have some amazing tools these days. Social media is a tool that is often used not for good, but we can use it for good to connect with people around the world and collect stories. And so I collect a lot of my stories online. There's a couple of good news subscriptions you can subscribe to. There's channels that have good news. I started my own newsletter last year called Talking Climate, where I share good news every week. I thought I was going to run out of good news every week. Now, a year and a half into it, I'm shoving 2 or 3 or 4 good news stories every week because I practice hope so rigorously. And when we see what's happening out there, we realize that giant boulder of climate action is not sitting at the bottom of an impossibly steep cliff with only Greta and Al Gore and Sir David Attenborough trying to push it up the cliff. If that was the way it was, we'd never get there. But when we realize...
I just want people to sit with that image for a moment.
I actually have a very vivid image in my head of that. But when we look around and we see what's happening, we realize that giant boulder is already at the top of the cliff. It's already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It has millions of hands on it. And if I add my hand, and if I use my voice to encourage others to add theirs, it's going to go faster. That's hope.
And that is the word according to Katharine Hayhoe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Al.